The envelope wasn't just stuck in my mailbox. It was wedged in there with a level of violence that suggested the sender had a personal vendetta against the very concept of communication. It was a thick, cream-colored square of cardstock, the kind of heavy, textured stationery usually reserved for wedding invitations or declarations of war. In my neighborhood, the oaks at Willow Creek, it was usually the latter. I stood at the end of my driveway, the asphalt radiating a humid Virginia heat that made the air shimmer like a mirage. It was 92 degrees at 10 in the morning, the kind of wet, suffocating heat that makes your shirt stick to your back the moment you step outside. I wiped a bead of sweat from my temple and pried the envelope open. The paper sliced my thumb. First blood to the Homeowners Association. I pulled out the letter. It was embossed with the community logo, a majestic oak tree that didn't actually exist anywhere in the development, considering they had bulldozed every native tree within a 10-mile radius to build these beige, cookie-cutter McMansions. I unfolded the letter. The text was centered, justified, and terrifying. Official notice of violation. Recipients: Mark D. Henderson, address 1402 Oak View Lane. Date: July 14, 2025. Violation: Article 4, Section 2.A, unauthorized non-turf vegetation. Fine: $500. I stared at the number. $500. For a plant. I looked up from the paper and scanned my front yard. It was a tragedy in 3 acts. The drought had been brutal this year. My neighbors, people like Dave the Yes Man Jenkins next door, had spent thousands on irrigation systems that ran illegally at 3:00 a.m. to keep their Kentucky bluegrass on life support. Their lawns were a chemically dependent, vibrant green that looked fake even from a distance. My lawn, on the other hand, was honest. It was brown, it was dormant, it was crispy, except for one spot. Near the mailbox, right where the sprinklers didn't reach, there was a patch of life. It was about 4 feet wide, a lush, soft explosion of green leaves and tiny white flowers. Clover. Dutch white clover. It had drifted in on the wind, taken root in the clay soil, and thrived where the expensive sod had surrendered. It was buzzing with life, literally. 3 fat bumblebees were stumbling drunkenly from flower to flower. It was the only happy thing on my property. $500, I muttered to the bees. You guys better be making gold honey. It's a Class B violation, Mark. I didn't need to turn around. I knew that voice. It sounded like a bandsaw cutting through a chalkboard. It was a voice that could curdle milk and cancel happy hour. I took a deep breath, counting to 3. 1, 2. Don't go to jail today, Mark. 3. I turned slowly. Brenda was standing on the sidewalk, positioned exactly 3 inches from my property line, honoring the boundary like a vampire who hadn't been invited in. Brenda was the president of the HOA, a position she held with the tyrannical grip of a dictator in a floral blouse. She was wearing her summer uniform, beige capri pants, a white polo shirt tucked in with military precision, and a visor that was pulled down low enough to shade her eyes but not her sneer. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, trying to inject a level of casual neighborliness into my voice that I definitely didn't feel. "Hot one out here, isn't it?" "The heat is no excuse for negligence," Brenda said. She didn't sweat. I was convinced she was reptilian. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm that echoed the pounding headache starting behind my eyes. "Did you receive the correspondence?" "I got the ransom note, yes," I said, holding up the heavy cardstock. $500? Brenda, we talked about this last week. It's clover. It is unauthorized, non-turf vegetation, she corrected, enunciating every syllable as if I were a slow child. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions are quite clear. Article 4 states that front lawns must consist of 90% approved turf grass, tall fescue, or Kentucky bluegrass. That... She pointed a manicured finger at my patch of clover as if it were a pile of radioactive waste. Is a weed. It's nitrogen fixing, I argued, stepping closer. It's actually good for the soil. It's green, it's soft. It doesn't need water. Look at Dave's lawn. I gestured to the house on the left. He's dumping 200 gallons of water a night on that grass just to keep it from dying. My clover is thriving on neglect. It's the American dream, Brenda. It is an eyesore, she snapped. It breaks the uniformity of the streetscape. The Oaks at Willow Creek is a premier community, Mark. We maintain standards. When potential buyers drive through, they want to see seamless, manicured lawns. They do not want to see a hippie salad bar growing around your mailbox. Hippie salad bar? I let out a dry laugh. Brenda, come on. It's 3 feet of clover. Who is it hurting? The bees seem to like it. The bees are a liability, she shot back instantly. What if a child walks by? What if they have an allergy? You are creating a public health hazard. The only child who walks by here is the Peterson kid, and he throws rocks at my car, I said. Maybe the bees would be a deterrent. Her eyes narrowed. The playful banter phase, if you could call it that, was over. She adjusted her visor. I am not here to debate horticulture with you, Mark. I am here to enforce the bylaws. You have received your second notice. You have 72 hours to remediate the violation. Remediate, I repeated. You mean kill it? I mean remove the weeds and install approved sod, she said. If the violation is not corrected by Friday at 5:00 p.m., the fine doubles. If it remains unpaid and uncorrected for 30 days, we will place a lien on your property. The word hung in the humid air. Lien. My mortgage was paid. I owned this house. I had worked 60-hour weeks as a systems analyst for 15 years to buy this slice of suburbia. And now, a woman whose biggest qualification was that she had enough free time to measure grass height with a ruler was threatening to take it away from me. You're going to put a lien on my house over a patch of clover? My voice rose an octave. I stepped off the driveway, closing the distance between us. I was still on my lawn, but I was close enough to smell her perfume, a cloying scent of lilies and old dust. Are you out of your mind? Brenda took a dramatic step back, clutching her clipboard to her chest. Her eyes widened, scanning the street for witnesses. Sir, you are being aggressive. I'm not being aggressive, I'm being incredulous, I shouted, throwing my hands up. This is extortion. It's $500 for a plant that grows naturally. Do you know how much sod costs? Do you know that we're in a drought advisory? Lower your voice, she hissed, looking toward Dave's house. I saw the blinds twitch in his living room window. You are disturbing the peace. You are disturbing my sanity. I poked the air in her direction. I am not paying this fine, Brenda, and I am not poisoning my ground just because you have a fetish for uniformity. Brenda's face went rigid. A cold, mechanical smile spread across her lips. It was the smile of someone who had a button to push. I tried to be reasonable, she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. I tried to be a good neighbor, but I see you are determined to be a problem. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was in a pink glitter case that clashed horribly with her soul. She tapped the screen, her eyes locked on mine. What are you doing? I asked. "I am contacting the authorities," she said. "I feel threatened. You are a large man, Mark. You are shouting. You are advancing on a female board member. I have a duty to protect myself." "I haven't left my property," I yelled, looking down at my feet. I was firmly on the crispy brown grass. "I'm 6 feet away from you." "Operator," Brenda said into the phone, her voice suddenly trembling, transforming instantly into the victim. "Yes, I need an officer at 1402 Oakview Lane immediately. I have a resident who is belligerent. He is screaming at me. I think he might hit me. Please hurry." She hung up and looked at me. The tremble vanished. The smirk returned. "Now," she said, "we wait." I should have gone inside. Any rational human being would have retreated into the air conditioning, locked the door, and poured a stiff drink. But I was frozen by the sheer audacity of it. I was paralyzed by the injustice. I stood there in the baking sun, sweat dripping down my back, staring at her. "You're unbelievable," I said. "You're wasting police resources for this?" "The police are here to serve the community," she said, checking her watch. "And you are disrupting the community." We stood in silence for 12 minutes. It was the longest 12 minutes of my life. Dave came out of his house, pretended to check his mail, saw Brenda, and sprinted back inside like he was under sniper fire. A delivery truck drove by, the driver slowing down to gawk at the tableau of suburban rage. Finally, a cruiser turned the corner. It wasn't lights and sirens, thank God, but it was still a police car rolling up to my curb. The car stopped. The window rolled down. I recognized the officer immediately. Officer Miller. He was a veteran of the force, a guy with salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked like it had been eroded by 20 years of dealing with idiots. I had met him 2 years ago when someone stole the catalytic converter off my truck. He was a good guy. He looked tired. He put the car in park and stepped out, adjusting his belt. He took a sip from a massive travel mug, looked at Brenda, looked at me, and sighed. It was a sigh that contained volumes of existential dread. "Morning, folks," Miller said, walking up the driveway. "Brenda, Mark." "Officer Miller!" Brenda exclaimed, rushing toward him like he was a long-lost lover. "Thank heavens you're here. I was terrified. He was practically foaming at the mouth." Miller looked at me. I was standing with my hands in my pockets, looking defeated. "Foaming, Mark?" Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's the heat, officer," I said. "Dehydration." "He was screaming," Brenda insisted, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "He advanced on me. He threatened the board. I was simply trying to deliver an official notice, and he went berserk." Miller turned to me. "That true? You go berserk over a piece of mail?" "She handed me a $500 fine for clover," I said, pointing to the patch. "I told her it was ridiculous. I raised my voice. I did not threaten her. I did not leave my property." Miller walked over to the clover. He nudged it with his boot. "Nice clover. My grandma used to have this stuff. Good for tea." "It is a violation," Brenda shrieked. "Code 4.2a, and his behavior is a violation of the Code of Conduct." Miller rubbed his temples. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, look. I've told you this before. The police department is not the enforcement arm of the HOA. Unless he punches you or threatens to burn your house down, this is a civil dispute. Being loud is not a crime. Being angry about a fine is not a crime. Hell, I'd be angry too." Brenda bristled. She drew herself up to her full height of 5'4". "Are you refusing to assist a citizen in distress?" "I'm assessing the situation," Miller said calmly. "And I assess that 2 adults are arguing about grass. Mark, stay on your property. Don't yell at her. It's not worth the blood pressure spike." He turned to Brenda. "Brenda, stop baiting him. Deliver your mail and move on. If you call 911 for a lawn dispute, Again, I'm going to cite you for misuse of emergency services. We have actual crimes to solve. Someone stole a riding mower on 4th Street this morning." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She wasn't used to being told no. She was used to being the ultimate authority. "This is unacceptable," she sputtered. "I will be contacting the precinct captain." "You do that," Miller said, walking back to his car. "Tell the captain I said hi. He hates HOAs, too." Miller paused at his car door and looked at me. He winked. "Get rid of the Clover, Mark. It's not worth the headache. She's got nothing better to do. You have a job. You lose the war of attrition every time." He got in and drove away. I was left alone with Brenda again. The victory felt hollow. Miller was right. I had a life. She had a clipboard. Brenda straightened her shirt. She composed herself. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "You think you won," she said softly. "I think we both just wasted 30 minutes of our lives," I said. "You have 72 hours, she said. "Friday at 5:00 p.m. If that clover isn't gone, and if there isn't fescue sod in its place, I will authorize the landscaping committee to do it for you. We will bill you for the labor. We will bill you for the materials. And we will add an administrative fee. It will cost you $2,000. "You can't do that," I said. "That's trespassing." "Read the bylaws, Mark," she said, a wicked gleam in her eye. Section 9. Right of abatement. The HOA reserves the right to enter private property to remedy violations that affect community value. We can do whatever we want. She smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Friday," she repeated. She turned and walked away, the clack, clack, clack of her shoes echoing down the street like a countdown. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the clover. I looked at the bees. I walked into my garage. The air was stiflingly hot, smelling of gasoline and old cardboard. I opened the fridge I kept out there and grabbed a beer. It was 10:45 a.m. I didn't care. I walked into my home office, sat down at my desk, and cracked the can. The sound was sharp and satisfying. "Read the bylaws," I mocked her voice. Section 9. Right of abatement. I opened my laptop. I logged into the community portal. I downloaded the PDF. The Oaks at Willow Creek. Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Revised 2023. It was 140 pages of legal gibberish. It covered everything from the shade of beige you could paint your trim, Sherwin-Williams softer tan, or macadamia, to the maximum weight of a dog, 45 pounds, Great Dane lovers. I started reading. I drank the beer. I got another one. I read through lunch. I read through the afternoon heat. I was looking for a defense. I was looking for a loophole. I was looking for anything that would let me keep my 3 feet of defiant greenery. And then, somewhere around page 84, buried in a section about environmental stewardship and water conservation, I found it. My eyes stopped moving. I sat up straighter. I zoomed in on the paragraph, section 4, paragraph 2, subsection C, alternative ground cover. In an effort to promote environmental sustainability, the association recognizes the value of native flora. While turf grass is the standard, homeowners may substitute turf for native ground cover if said cover is verified to be an indigenous species to the Piedmont region of Virginia. Such cover must be maintained to cover 100% of the designated area. No approval from the Architectural Review Committee is required for the reversion of land to strictly native, non-invasive species, provided the species is listed on the Virginia Department of Conservation's Native Plant Registry. I read it again. No approval required. Reversion of land to strictly native species. Brenda had probably never read this far. This was boilerplate text, likely inserted by the developers years ago to get some tax credit for being green before they handed the reins over to the HOA board. I looked out the window at my clover. Clover wasn't native. It was European. Brenda was technically right about the clover. But a dangerous idea began to form in the back of my mind. An idea that was spiteful, expensive, and absolutely glorious. If she wanted native, I would give her native. But I wouldn't give her pretty native. I wouldn't give her black-eyed Susans or nice, tidy Virginia sweet spire. I opened Google. I typed, "Rare native ground cover Virginia." I scrolled past the flowers. I scrolled past the ferns. I wanted something archaic. I wanted something primal. And then I saw it, Thuidium shenandoan, the Shenandoah velvet moss. It was listed on the Federal Endangered Species list. It was incredibly rare. It was highly sensitive. And according to the map, it was indigenous to exactly my county. I clicked on the Legal Protections tab. Under the Endangered Species Act of 1973, it is a federal offense to damage, remove, or disturb the habitat of Thuidium shenandoan. Civil penalties up to $25,000, criminal penalties up to $50,000, and imprisonment. I leaned back in my chair. A slow grin spread across my face. Brenda wanted to use the rules? Fine. We'll use the rules. But we're not just using the HOA rules anymore. We're going to bring in the federal government. I needed a phone. I needed a contractor who didn't ask questions. I needed someone who could get me endangered moss by Friday. I picked up my phone and dialed a number a friend in landscaping had given me years ago. A guy named Gus. He was rumored to be the kind of guy who could find anything. Rare orchids, out-of-season truffles, or potentially illicit fungi. The phone rang. It went to voicemail. "This is Gus. I'm in the dirt. Leave a message." "Gus," I said. "This is Mark Henderson. I need to buy a wetland. I need the ugliest, most legally protected moss you can find. And I need it installed in 48 hours. I'm paying cash." I hung up. The war on clover was over. The war of the moss was about to begin. I spent the next 3 hours doing something I hadn't done since college. Studying. My desk was covered in empty Red Bull cans and printed pages of federal legislation. My browser had 40 tabs open. I wasn't looking at pornography or sports. I was looking at the Department of the Interior's list of protected bryophytes. It was a fascinating and terrifying world. I learned that Thuidium shenandoan, or Shenandoah velvet moss, wasn't just rare. It was the panda bear of the moss world. It was fussy. It was fragile. It required specific acidity, specific shade, and specific humidity. And because it was so pathetic at surviving on its own, the United States government had wrapped it in a layer of legal armor so thick it could stop a tank. I read the text of the Endangered Species Act of 1973 until my eyes crossed. Section 9. Prohibited Acts. It is unlawful for any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States to remove and reduce to possession any such species from areas under federal jurisdiction, maliciously damage or destroy any such species on any such area, or remove, cut, dig up, or damage or destroy any such species on any other area in knowing violation of any law or regulation of any state. I cross-referenced this with the Virginia Administrative Code. Collection, destruction, or disturbance of listed species without a permit is a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 12 months in jail and a fine of not less than $2,500 per specimen. Per specimen. I looked at the image of the moss on my screen. It grew in clumps. A specimen could be interpreted as a single clump. If I covered my yard in this stuff, and Brenda took a rake to it, she wouldn't just be breaking a rule. She would be committing a massacre. I leaned back, linking my fingers behind my head. It was perfect. It was the nuclear option. But a nuclear option requires a launch code, and I didn't have one. I needed the moss. I checked my phone. No missed calls. Gus hadn't called back. I started to panic. It was Wednesday afternoon. Brenda's deadline was Friday at 5:00 p.m. If I didn't have the ground cover installed by then, she would send in her goons to lay sod, and I'd be stuck with a bill for $2,000 and a lawn that looked exactly like everyone else's. I called the number again. Voicemail. I tried a text. Gus, it's Mark. I have $15,000 cash and a desire to ruin an HOA president's life using botany. Please call me. I put the phone down. 10 seconds later, it rang. You had me at ruining the HOA, the voice on the other end said. It sounded like a cement mixer gargling gravel. Gus? Yeah. Who's this? Mark Henderson. I got your number from Sarah at the University Extension office. She said you're the only guy with a propagation permit for Thuidium. Sarah talks too much, Gus grumbled. I heard the distinct sound of a lighter flicking and a deep inhale. You know that stuff is a nightmare, right? It dies if you look at it wrong. It dies if you walk on it. It dies if a dog pees on it within a 10-foot radius. I don't need it to live forever, Gus, I said. I need it to live long enough to get a federal habitat sign in my yard. Ah, Gus said. The three-tone of his voice changed. It went from annoyed contractor to intrigued co-conspirator. Spite landscaping, my favorite genre. Can you get it? I have mats, Gus said. I grow 'em for state park restoration. I got about 600 square feet of starter culture in the greenhouse. It's ugly as sin, Mark. It looks like a wet hairball. Does it meet the criteria for native ground cover under the county statute? Technically, yeah. It's indigenous to the Piedmont foothills. It's older than the dinosaurs. How soon can you be here? I'm finishing a job in Manassas. I can swing by in an hour to look at the site, but I warn you, my truck leaks oil. Your neighbors are gonna hate me. Gus, I said, that is a feature, not a bug. An hour later, the sound of an approaching catastrophe echoed through the subdivision. The Oaks at Willow Creek was a quiet neighborhood. The loudest noise was usually the hum of Tesla electric motors or the distant whine of a leaf blower. What turned onto Oakview Lane sounded like a tank dying of emphysema. It was a Ford F-350. The year was indeterminate, mostly because the body panels were 3 different colors: primer gray, rust red, and a fading forest green. The exhaust pipe was held on by what looked like coat hangers, and it was belching a cloud of blue smoke that hung in the stagnant air. The truck rumbled down the street, rattling the windows of the pristine houses. It slowed down in front of my house and mounted the curb with one tire before coming to a shuddering halt. The engine died with a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot. I saw Mrs. Gable 3 doors down drop her watering can. The driver's door groaned open. Gus stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, maybe 5'8", but almost as wide. He wore denim overalls with no shirt underneath, revealing a tapestry of sunburn and chest hair. He had a beard that reached his sternum, tangled and wild, possibly housing small birds. He was wearing boots that had clearly been used to kick boulders. He looked at my house. He looked at the neighbors. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handful of sunflower seeds, threw them into his mouth, shells and all, and spat the debris onto my driveway. "Nice place," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence of the street. "Smells like repression." I walked out to meet him. "Gus, thanks for coming." He looked me up and down. I was wearing khakis and a polo. I looked like I belonged here. He squinted. "You look like a narc," he said. "I'm a desperate man," I replied. "Come look at the yard." We walked over to the patch of clover. Gus knelt down. His knees cracked audibly. He touched the soil with a finger that was thicker than a sausage. "Clay," he muttered. "Compacted. Terrible drainage. The clover likes it because clover is a weed. The velvet moss, it'll hate this." "Can we fix it?" "We can fix anything with enough sulfur and anger," Gus said, standing up. He looked at the expanse of brown, dying grass. "So, walk me through the plan. You want to replace all this?" "The bylaw says I can substitute turf for native ground cover if it covers 100% of the designated area," I recited. "Brenda, the HOA president, wants me to put in fescue. I want to put in something she can't touch." Gus nodded slowly, chewing his seeds. "The velvet moss carries a critical habitat designation. Once I lay the mats and log the GPS coordinates with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which I have to do as part of my permit, this yard becomes federal land, essentially. If she steps on it, she's committing a felony." "That's the goal." "It's gonna cost you," Gus said. He turned and looked at the house across the street. A curtain twitched. Gus waved. The curtain snapped shut. "I gotta strip this topsoil. I gotta bring in an acidic peat mixture. I gotta lay the mats. And I gotta install an irrigation misting system because this stuff needs moisture, not soaking." "How much?" 15 grand, Gus said without blinking. "Cash, half up front." My stomach did a little flip. $15,000. That was my savings. That was the trip to Italy I had been promising myself for 3 years. That was a new car. I looked down the street. I saw Brenda's white SUV turn the corner. She slowed down as she passed my house. She stared at Gus. She stared at his truck. She stared at the oil stain forming on the asphalt. She rolled down her window. "Excuse me," she called out. "Sir, you cannot park a commercial vehicle of that condition on the street. It's an eyesore." Gus turned slowly. He looked at her. He didn't say a word. He just slowly chewed his sunflower seeds, worked up a mouthful of saliva, and spat a stream of brown liquid onto the tire of his own truck. Brenda gasped. She rolled up her window and sped off. I looked at Gus. "Do you take a check?" "For you?" Gus smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white. "I'll take a check, but I need the deposit today. We start tomorrow." "Tomorrow is Thursday. Can we finish by Friday at 5 o'clock? "Mark," Gus said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I can strip this earth bare and paint it green in 6 hours if I have enough Red Bull. We'll be done by lunch on Friday." We went inside to sign the paperwork. Gus's contract was a grease-stained piece of carbon paper on a clipboard that looked like it had been run over by a tractor. "Now," Gus said, sitting at my kitchen table and looking incredibly out of place amidst my stainless steel appliances. "I need to be clear about something. This moss, it's not just protected. It's delicate. When we put it down, it's going to look like gray sludge for about 3 weeks. It's the dormancy phase. It looks like dead mold." "Perfect," I said. "Uglier the better." "And," Gus continued, pointing a pen at me, You can't walk on it. I mean it. You put 1 foot on that mat. You kill the spores. You need to put stepping stones in if you want to get to your mailbox. I'll use the driveway, I said. I don't care if I have to rappel from the roof. I just want it in the ground. Gus scribbled some numbers. I'll bring the Bobcat tomorrow at 7:00 a.m. That's the earliest I can legally make noise, right? Technically, yes, I said. But the HOA has a courtesy rule about 8:00 a.m. Gus grinned. 7:00 a.m. it is. He stood up, leaving a faint dusting of soil on my chair. Get the money. I'm gonna go make some calls to get the peat moss trucked in. We're gonna turn your front yard into a bog, Mark. A beautiful, federally protected bog. He walked out. I watched him get into his truck. It took 3 tries to start the engine. When it finally roared to life, a cloud of black smoke engulfed my neighbor's prized rose bushes. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction in my chest. I spent the rest of the evening preparing. I went to the bank. The teller looked at me suspiciously when I withdrew $7,000 in cash, but I just told her I was doing some home improvements. Must be a nice renovation, she said. Oh, it's going to be spectacular, I replied. When I got home, I printed out the documents Gus had emailed me. They were the real deal. Department of the Interior, permit for propagation of endangered flora. His name was on it. My address was listed as a satellite restoration zone. I was reading through the section on legal liability for habitat disruption when my doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It wasn't Brenda. It was Dave from next door. The yes man. I opened the door. Dave was holding a Tupperware container. He looked nervous. He was wearing a polo shirt tucked into cargo shorts, the official uniform of the suburban dad who has given up on his dreams. Hey, Mark, Dave said, shifting his weight. Sarah made cookies. Thought you might want some. Cut the crap, Dave, I said, leaning against the doorframe. What do you want? Dave sighed. He looked over his shoulder at his own house, then at the street. Look, man, Brenda's on the warpath. She sent an email blast to the board about you. She's saying you're bringing criminal elements into the neighborhood. She saw that truck. That truck is my contractor, I said. He looks like he buries bodies for a living, Dave whispered. Mark, seriously, just put down the sod. We'll help you. I've got a discount at the turf farm. Don't fight her. She's crazy. She's a bully, Dave, I said. And you guys just let her do it. Remember when she made you take down your kid's basketball hoop because it was too orange? Dave winced. Yeah, but it's the rules. Screw the rules, I said. I found a new rule. What are you doing? Dave asked, looking past me into the house like he expected to see a meth lab. What is that guy doing tomorrow? We're going native, Dave, I said mysteriously. We're returning the land to its ancestral roots. Dave looked confused. So, not fescue? Definitely not fescue. She's going to sue you, Dave warned. The HOA has a lawyer on retainer. They'll bury you in legal fees. Let them try, I said. Thanks for the cookies. I closed the door. I didn't sleep well that night. I felt like a general on the eve of battle. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, imagining the look on Brenda's face when she realized she was powerless. At 6:45 a.m., I was up. I made a pot of coffee. I stood by the window, watching the street. At 6:55 a.m., the convoy arrived. Gus wasn't alone this time. He was leading a parade. First came his rattletrap truck. Behind it was a flatbed trailer hauling a Bobcat skid-steer loader. The Bobcat was old, battered, and painted a shade of yellow that suggested it had been used to clean up nuclear waste. Behind that was a dump truck, a massive 10-wheel dump truck filled with dark, loamy black dirt. and behind that was a pickup truck full of crew members. They were a motley crew. One guy had a mohawk. Another guy looked like he was 100 years old. They all looked like they knew how to work. They pulled up to the curb. The air brakes of the dump truck hissed. Psh! A sound that echoed like a sniper shot in the quiet morning. I checked my watch. 6:59 a.m. Gus hopped out of his truck. He held up a hand to his crew. He looked at his watch. He waited. Seconds ticked by. 7:00 a.m. Gus dropped his hand. The engines roared. The Bobcat fired up with a clanking, diesel-choked growl. The dump truck's backup beeper started wailing, beep, beep, beep. It was the loudest thing that had ever happened on Oakview Lane. I walked out the front door, coffee in hand, grinning like a maniac. Gus met me at the end of the driveway. He was wearing ear protection and holding a sledgehammer for reasons I couldn't immediately discern. "Morning, sunshine," he yelled over the noise. "Ready to make some mud?" "Let's do it," I shouted back. "First step," Gus said, pointing to the Bobcat. "Scorched earth. We gotta remove the top 3 inches of this clay. Grass, clover, weeds, everything. It all goes." "Even the clover?" I felt a pang of sadness. "Collateral damage," Gus said. "The moss needs a clean slate. We're stripping it down to the subsoil." The Bobcat operator, the guy with the mohawk, spun the machine around. He lowered the bucket. He drove onto my lawn. The steel blade bit into the earth. With a tearing sound, he ripped up a long strip of sod and clover. It had begun. I saw lights flickering on in every house on the block. People were coming out onto their porches in bathrobes, clutching coffee mugs, staring in horror. And then, like a summoned demon, Brenda appeared. She didn't walk. She marched. She was wearing a pink silk robe and fuzzy slippers, which somehow made her look more terrifying. Her hair was in curlers. She was screaming before she even reached the sidewalk. "Stop! Stop this instant!" She ran right up to the edge of the property line. The Bobcat operator ignored her. He dumped a load of dirt into the street, temporarily, I hoped, and spun around for another pass. "Mark!" Brenda screamed, turning to me. "What is this? What are you doing?" I took a sip of coffee. "Remediation, Brenda, just like you asked." "This isn't remediation. This is a construction site," she shrieked. "You need an architectural review committee approval for major landscaping. You need a permit for heavy machinery." "Actually," I yelled back, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "Bylaw Section 4, Paragraph 2. No approval is required for the reversion of land to strictly native species. And the county noise ordinance says construction is permitted after 7:00 a.m. It's 7:05. She stared at me, her mouth agape. The Bobcat roared behind me, tearing up another chunk of the perfectly manicured neighborhood aesthetic. "You are destroying the property value," she yelled. "Look at this mess. There is dirt in the street." "We'll sweep it up," Gus chimed in, walking over. He loomed over her. Brenda took a step back. "Don't worry, lady. It's gonna look real different by tonight." "Who are you?" Brenda demanded, looking at Gus's overalls with disdain. "I'm the artist," Gus said, spitting a sunflower seed shell near her fuzzy slipper. Brenda looked at the shell. She looked at the Bobcat. She looked at me. "I am calling the police," she announced. "This is a disturbance of the peace. This is vandalism of the community aesthetic." "Call them," I said cheerfully. "Officer Miller is on the day shift. I'm sure he'd love to explain the civil code to you again." She glared at me with pure hatred. "You will regret this, Mark. I will fine you for every clod of dirt on this road. I will fine you for the noise. I will fine you for the ugly truck. I will bankrupt you." Get in line, I said. Gus already has my check. She turned and stormed back to her house. I watched her go. She seems nice, Gus said. She's a pillar of the community, I replied. Right, Gus said. Hey, Mohawk, tear up the flower beds too. We need bare earth. By noon, my yard was gone. It was a shocking sight. In a sea of green, manicured lawns, my property was a gaping wound of raw, red clay. The crew had scraped it clean. There wasn't a blade of grass left. Then came the dump truck. It backed up and dumped 5 tons of amended peat substrate onto the driveway. It smelled like a swamp. It smelled like sulfur and rotting leaves. It was pungent. The neighbors had gathered in a small cluster down the street, whispering. They looked like villagers watching Frankenstein's castle. Smell that? Gus said, inhaling deeply. That's the smell of acidity. The moss loves it. They spent the next 4 hours wheelbarrowing the black sludge onto the yard, spreading it out, raking it flat. It looked like we were preparing to pave the yard with asphalt, but darker and smellier. By 4 p.m., the yard was a flat, black sheet of mud. Okay, Gus said, wiping sweat and dirt from his forehead. Time for the carpet. He went to the back of his truck and opened a cooler. Inside were the mats. They were squares of organic mesh, about 2 feet by 2 feet. Covered in them was a thin, patchy layer of grayish-brown fuzz. It looked like lint you'd pull out of a dryer filter, but wet. Behold, Gus said reverently. Thuidium shenandoan. The velvet moss. It's hideous, I said, genuinely impressed. It's dormant, Gus corrected. It's sleeping. We wake it up with the mist. They began to lay the mats. They pinned them into the black mud. They worked with surprising delicacy, joining the seams so it looked like one continuous sheet of gray mold. By 6 p.m., it was done. My yard looked like a parking lot made of old blankets. It was gray, it was brown, it was wet. It was absolutely, undeniably, the ugliest thing in the county. Gus set up a temporary misting system, a series of hoses and nozzles on spikes that created a fine fog over the yard. There, Gus said, standing back and admiring his handiwork. In 48 hours, the spores will begin to adhere to the substrate. In 2 weeks, you'll see the sporophytes pop up. They look like little hairs. It'll stay brown for a while, then turn a nice, deep, rotting olive color. And the paperwork? I'm filing the GPS coordinates tonight, Gus said. By Monday, this is on the federal map. He handed me the invoice for the balance. I wrote him the check. You're a crazy son of a bitch, Mark, Gus said, shaking my hand. His grip was like a vice. I like it. Thanks, Gus. He loaded up his crew. The convoy rumbled away, leaving a trail of black dirt and diesel fumes. I stood alone on my driveway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the gray mats. The misting system hissed softly. Brenda came out of her house. She had a camera. She walked down the street, stood on the sidewalk, and took a picture of my yard. She lowered the camera and looked at me. She was smiling. "You call this landscaping?" she shouted. "It looks like a sewage spill." "It's native," I shouted back. "It's a violation," she yelled. Section 8, Maintenance of Aesthetics. Yards must present a neat and attractive appearance. That is an abomination. Expect the fine on Monday. She turned and walked away. I looked at my gray, wet, protected swamp. "Just you wait, Brenda," I whispered. "Just you wait." I went inside, grabbed a beer, and sat by the window, watching the mist settle over my $50,000 trap. The moss lay there, silent and ugly, waiting for a victim. The weekend passed in a haze of humidity and high-stakes horticulture. My front yard had become a local tourist attraction, though not the kind that ends up on a Best of Virginia postcard. It was more of a warnings to future generations kind of attraction. People would drive slowly past the house, slowing their Teslas and their Tahoes to a crawl, staring out the window with expressions ranging from confusion to open hostility. The gray mats that Gus had pinned to the black mud didn't look like plants. They looked like a massive, discarded art project made of dryer lint and despair. The misting system hissed rhythmically, psh, 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 keeping the whole mess damp and glistening. It smelled, too. The amended peat substrate Gus had used was rich in organic material, which is a polite way of saying it smelled like a bog that had just burped. It wasn't a sewage smell, exactly. It was the scent of deep, ancient decay. It was the smell of the Jurassic period. On Monday morning, I was sipping coffee on the porch, admiring the desolation, when the inevitable happened. Brenda arrived. She didn't come alone this time. She had an entourage. Walking beside her was a man in a polo shirt so tight, I was worried about his circulation. He was holding a camera with a telephoto lens. This was Kevin, the head of the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. Kevin was a man who measured grass height with a laser rangefinder. They stopped at the edge of the driveway. Kevin lifted the camera and started snapping photos like he was documenting a crime scene. "Morning, Kevin," I called out. "Make sure you get my good side." Kevin lowered the camera. He looked at the yard, then at me. "Mark, what the hell is this?" "It's the remediation," I said, descending the porch steps but stopping safely on the concrete. Brenda asked for native ground cover. This is it. "This isn't ground cover," Kevin said, gesturing at the wet gray mats. "This is... I don't even know what this is. It looks like a fungal infection." "It's Thuidium shenandoah," I said proudly. "It's in the dormant establishment phase. Give it 2 weeks. It's going to be breathtaking." "It smells like a latrine," Brenda interjected, waving a hand in front of her nose. "This is intolerable, Mark. You have replaced a few weeds with a biological hazard." "It's nature, Brenda," I said. "It's the smell of the earth healing itself." "It is a violation of Section 8, Aesthetic Maintenance," Brenda snapped. "The bylaws clearly state that all landscaping must present a neat, attractive, and well-maintained appearance consistent with the community standard. This?" She pointed a manicured nail at the swamp. "This is hideous. It is dragging down the property values of the entire block. The Robinsons across the street are trying to sell their house. How are they supposed to host an open house with this across the street?" "Maybe they can market it as a view of a nature preserve," I suggested. Kevin stepped forward. "Mark, look. We can't have this. It's not just ugly, it's practically industrial. You have hoses everywhere. You have mud running into the gutter. We're going to have to cite you." "Cite away," I said. "But just so you know, I've already registered the site coordinates with the Department of the Interior. You might want to be careful where you step." Kevin scoffed. "Department of the Interior? Mark, this isn't Yellowstone. It's a cul-de-sac in suburbia. Stop playing games. You have 24 hours to remove this debris and lay sod, or we start fining you for every day it remains." "I can't remove it," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's federally protected now. I'm just the steward. Brenda rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. You are delusional. Come on, Kevin. We have enough evidence for the lien. They walked away. Kevin took a few more photos over his shoulder, shaking his head. An hour later, the email notification pinged on my phone. Notice of violation. Level 3. Nature. Creating a public nuisance. Unsightly debris. Failure to maintain aesthetics. Fine. $1,000. Remedy. Immediate removal of unauthorized materials. I didn't delete it. I printed it. I added it to the file folder labeled The Trap. Week 1 passed. The moss began to change. Gus was right. It didn't turn green. It turned weird. The gray mats seemed to dissolve into the mud, and in their place, thousands of tiny hair-like stalks began to rise. They were a brownish olive color, topped with little capsules that looked like alien eggs. The texture of the yard shifted from wet blanket to diseased velvet. It was, objectively, the ugliest thing I had ever seen. It looked like the ground had a rash, but it was alive. And more importantly, it was bonding. Gus stopped by on Wednesday night to check the progress. He parked his truck in the driveway this time, ostensibly to check the irrigation, but mostly to annoy Brenda. He knelt down at the edge of the mulch bed and peered at the moss through a jeweler's loupe. Beautiful, he whispered. Look at those sporophytes. They're happy, Mark. They love this peat. It looks like goblin vomit, Gus, I said, standing over him with a beer. Yeah, but it's healthy goblin vomit, Gus said, standing up. The root system is establishing. In another week, you couldn't tear this up without taking 6 inches of soil with it. The HOA is fining me $1,000 a day, I said. Gus laughed. Let 'em fine you. Have they threatened to abate yet? Not yet. Just fines. Give it time, Gus said. They can't stand to lose. They'll try to come onto the property. That's when we get 'em. He handed me a metal stake. It was heavy, attached to. It was a metal sign, red and white, with the official seal of the U.S. Department of the Interior. Critical Habitat Area. No trespassing. Protected species. Thuidium shenandoah violators. Subject to prosecution under 16 U.S.C. Sich 1531. Put this in the middle, Gus said, right where they can see it. Make it impossible for them to claim ignorance. I walked into the center of the yard, stepping carefully on the few flagstones we had laid down for access. I drove the stake into the soft, black earth. It stood there like a flag of conquest. Perfect, Gus said. Now we wait for the explosion. The explosion came 2 days later, on Friday. I was working from home, ignoring a spreadsheet, when a courier van pulled up. A man in a uniform walked up the driveway, stepping gingerly around the mud runoff, and rang the doorbell. Mark Henderson? That's me. Sign here. He handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't from the HOA management company. It was from a law firm. Patterson, Finch, and Associates. I signed for it. The courier left. I took the envelope into the kitchen and opened it with a steak knife. It was a legal demand letter. Dear Mr. Henderson, we represent the Oaks at Willow Creek Homeowners Association. You are currently in violation of multiple covenants regarding property maintenance, aesthetic standards, and the prohibition of nuisance materials. Despite repeated warnings and fines, you have failed to remedy the condition of your front yard, which is currently covered in an unidentified, decaying organic matter that emits a foul odor and negatively impacts the community welfare. This letter serves as a final notice. Under Article 9, Section 3 of the CCR's Right of Self-Help Abatement, the association is authorized to enter any lot to abate a violation that the owner refuses to correct. The cost of such abatement will be assessed to the owner. The association has contracted Green Earth Landscaping to restore your property to community standards. This work is scheduled to commence on Wednesday, July 24th at 8:00 a.m. A crew will remove the debris and install approved fescue sod. You are hereby ordered not to interfere with the contractors. Any interference will result in legal action and potential police involvement. Sincerely, Preston Finch, Esquire. I read it twice. My heart was hammering in my chest. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. They were actually going to do it. They were going to invoke self-help abatement. It was the HOA equivalent of a SWAT raid. They were going to forcibly landscape my yard. I picked up the phone and called Gus. "They took the bait," I said. "They're coming?" Gus asked. "Wednesday, 8:00 a.m. They hired Green Earth Landscaping." Gus let out a low whistle. "Green Earth? Those guys are corporate shills. They love sod. They'll strip that moss in 10 minutes. "What do I do?" "You need to send one last warning," Gus said. "You need to be able to prove in court that you told them exactly what they were about to destroy. Send them the federal registration number. Send them the species data. Make it official. And then? And then you call the marshal," Gus said. "I'll text you his direct line. His name is Agent Reynolds. He's a hard ass. He hates developers. Tell him you have an imminent threat to a Class A habitat." "Will he come out for a lawn dispute?" "Mark," Gus said, his voice deadly serious. "To these guys, it's not a lawn dispute. It's poaching. It's destruction of government resources. If you tell him a landscaping crew is coming to bulldoze a registered site, he'll bring the cavalry." I spent the rest of the day drafting the email. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to be the kind of document that would be read aloud in a courtroom while Brenda sobbed into a tissue. 2. The Board of Directors. The Oaks at Willow Creek, C. Patterson, Finch and Associates. Subject: Urgent. Federal protection status of 1402, Oak View Lane. Board members and legal counsel, I am in receipt of your notice regarding the forced abatement scheduled for Wednesday. I am writing this to formally notify you that my property is currently a registered propagation site for Thuidium Shenandoah velvet moss, a species protected under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. The decaying organic matter you refer to is a critical habitat. I have attached the Department of the Interior registration documents, the species fact sheet, and a map of the protected zone. Any attempt to remove, disturb, or damage this vegetation carries severe federal penalties, including criminal prosecution. I strongly advise you to cancel the landscaping crew. The sign in my yard is not a decoration. It is a federal warning. Govern yourselves accordingly. Mark Henderson. I hit send. I sat back and waited. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. On Monday, I got a reply. It wasn't from the lawyer. It was from Brenda. "Mark, we have reviewed your documents. The board finds your attempt to classify your neglected yard as a nature preserve to be frivolous and obstructive. The moss you claim to be endangered is indistinguishable from common mold. Our landscaping experts at Green Earth have assured us that no such habitat exists in a residential subdivision. The abatement will proceed as scheduled. Please ensure your vehicle is removed from the driveway to allow access for the equipment." Brenda. She didn't believe me. She thought I had photoshopped the documents. She thought I was bluffing. "Oh, Brenda," I whispered to the screen, "you have no idea." I printed her email. I stapled it to the legal notice. I put it all in the folder. Then I called the number Gus had given me. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Law Enforcement Division, a voice answered. Crisp. Professional. Yes, hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Mark Henderson. I am the custodian of a registered propagation site for Thuidium shenandoah in Fairfax County. I have reason to believe that a deliberate destruction of the habitat is scheduled to take place this Wednesday morning. There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing. Can you verify the site registration number? The agent asked. I gave it to him. US FWS 2025 V092. More typing. Then the tone of the agent's voice changed. It went from bored bureaucrat to sharp hunter. I see the registration here, he said. Authorized to one Gus Miller, Native Soul Landscapes, correct? That's my contractor. I'm the landowner. And who is threatening the habitat? My homeowners association, I said. They believe it's a weed. They have hired a crew to scrape the land down to the subsoil. I have notified them of the status, but they have stated in writing that they intend to proceed. In writing? The agent asked. Yes, sir, I have the emails. Mr. Henderson, the agent said, do not interfere with them physically. Do not put yourself in harm's way. We will have a unit in the area on Wednesday morning. What time did you say they were coming? 8:00 a.m. We'll be there, he said. Don't touch anything. The line went dead. Tuesday was the longest day of my life. The neighborhood was buzzing. Word had gotten out that the abatement was happening. It was the suburban equivalent of a public execution. People were excited. I saw Dave trimming his hedges. He looked over at me, shaking his head. You should have just planted the fescue, Mark, he called out. Now you're going to pay double. We'll see, Dave, I said. We'll see. I spent the evening watering the moss. The misting system hissed in the twilight. The moss looked particularly repulsive tonight. A deep, bruised purple-brown under the streetlights. The spore stalks were standing tall, swaying in the gentle breeze. I felt a strange affection for it. It was ugly, yes, but it was my ugly. It was a living, breathing middle finger to conformity. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars on the highway. At 7:00 a.m. on Wednesday, I woke up. I showered. I put on my suit. If I was going to watch the world burn, I wanted to look like I was in charge of the fire. I made coffee. I stood by the front window. At 7:45 a.m. the enemy arrived. It was a convoy. Brenda led the way in her white SUV, looking like a general leading the charge. Behind her was the Green Earth landscaping truck, a massive polished vehicle with a trailer. On the trailer sat a bright orange excavator. They parked on the street. The air brakes hissed. Doors slammed. I saw Brenda get out. She was holding a clipboard. She was smiling. She pointed at my house. She pointed at the yard. The Green Earth foreman hopped out. He was a big guy in a neon yellow vest. He looked bored. He walked around the truck and started unchaining the excavator. I checked my watch. 7:50 a.m. Where was the marshal? I felt a seed of panic in my stomach. What if they didn't come? What if Gus was wrong? What if they just let them scrape it all away and then sent a fine later? Once the moss was gone, the evidence was gone. I walked out onto the porch. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out. She looked up. Her smile was blinding. "Good morning, Mark. Please move your truck. The crew needs the driveway." "I really think you should reconsider this, Brenda," I said, leaning on the railing. "Remember the email?" "The fake email?" She laughed. "Mark, it's over. Just let the professionals do their job. By tonight, you'll have a lovely green lawn, and we can all move on." "It's going to be expensive," I warned. "Oh, I know," she said. "For you." She signaled the foreman. "Go ahead. Rip it out." The foreman signaled the operator. The excavator engine roared to life. Vroom! I scanned the street. No black SUV, no government plates. Just Dave looking out his window, and Mrs. Gable watching from her porch. The excavator clanked off the trailer. It turned toward my yard. The tracks chewed up the edge of the curb. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack a rib. Come on, I thought. Come on. The excavator rolled up the driveway. The operator lifted the bucket. He positioned it over the center of the yard, right over the biggest, ugliest patch of moss. "Take it all!" Brenda screamed over the engine noise. "Every bit of it!" The bucket descended. I closed my eyes. And then I heard it. Whoop, whoop! It was a short, sharp siren blast. Not a police siren. Something deeper. Something angrier. I opened my eyes. A black Chevrolet Tahoe with tinted windows had pulled up silently behind the landscaping trailer. It had government plates. Blue lights were flashing in the grille. Two doors opened simultaneously. Two men stepped out. They were dressed in green and gray tactical uniforms. They wore sidearms. Their vests had big yellow letters on the back. Federal Wildlife Officer. The lead officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and sunglasses, didn't run. He walked with the terrifying purpose of a man who has the entire weight of the United States Code behind him. He raised a megaphone. "Power down the vehicle!" he boomed. The sound echoed off the houses. "Immediately!" The excavator operator froze. The bucket hovered 6 inches above the moss. Brenda spun around. Her mouth dropped open. "What is this?" she screeched. "Who are you?" The officer lowered the megaphone. He walked right past her, ignoring her completely, and walked up to the excavator. He looked at the operator. "Turn it off," he said. "Now." The operator scrambled to kill the engine. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The officer turned to Brenda. He took off his sunglasses. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Step away from the habitat." Brenda blinked. "Excuse me? This is private property. We are conducting an abatement." "I am Special Agent Reynolds, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service," he said. He flashed a badge that looked heavy enough to knock someone out. "And you are currently soliciting the destruction of a federally protected species." I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted like victory. "Step away from the habitat," Agent Reynolds repeated. His voice was level, devoid of emotion, and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who didn't need to yell because he carried a gun and the entire U.S. legal code on his hip. Brenda didn't step back. She stepped forward. It was a reflex, I think. For 10 years, she had been the apex predator of the cul-de-sac. She had bullied contractors, terrified teenagers, and made grown men weep over the shade of their mulch. She didn't know how to de-escalate. She only knew how to double down. "This is ridiculous," she spat, gesturing wildly at the excavator, at the yard, at me. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. We have a signed contract. This is a neighborhood cleanup. Who called you? Was it him?" She pointed a shaking finger at me on the porch. "He's a liar. He printed that sign off the internet." Agent Reynolds didn't look at me. He looked at the ground. He looked at the excavator tracks. He pulled a small digital camera from his vest pocket and snapped a photo of where the heavy steel tread had crushed the edge of the mulch bed. "Sir," Reynolds said, addressing the excavator operator who was still sitting in the cab, looking like he wanted to dissolve into thin air. "Step down from the vehicle. Keep your hands visible." The operator scrambled out of the cab so fast he almost fell. He held his hands up like he was being robbed. "I didn't know," the operator yelled. "She told me to dig. I'm just a subcontractor." The green earth foreman, the guy in the neon vest, walked forward slowly. He looked pale. He was looking at the agent's badge, then at the sign in the yard, then at the moss. The realization was dawning on him. "Officer," the foreman said, his voice cracking. "Agent, whatever. Look, we have a work order. It says debris removal. Nobody said anything about species." "Did you inspect the site prior to deployment?" Reynolds asked, turning his sunglasses toward the foreman. "Well, yeah, but did you see the posted federal signage?" Reynolds pointed to the metal sign Gus had staked in the center of the yard, the one that clearly said critical habitat. I thought it was a joke," the foreman stammered. "The lady said it was fake." Reynolds turned to Brenda. He took a slow step toward her, invading her personal space in a way that made her clutch her clipboard like a life preserver. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, "did you instruct this crew to ignore a posted Department of the Interior warning marker?" "It is a joke!" Brenda shrieked. Her face was turning a blotchy red. "It's moss! It's brown, ugly moss! Look at it! Does that look like a national treasure to you? It looks like mold! I am removing a blight on this. Community!" She made a fatal error then. In a fit of frustration, she stomped her foot. She stomped it right onto the edge of the nearest moss mat. She ground her heel into the soft, gray-brown fuzz. "It's just dirt!" she yelled, grinding her shoe. The silence that followed was absolute. Agent Reynolds didn't shout. He didn't tackle her. He simply reached for his radio. "Dispatch," he said calmly into his shoulder mic. "I have an active 16 USC violation in progress. Suspect is belligerent and currently engaging in direct habitat destruction in front of a federal officer. Requesting local PD for transport assistance." He looked at Brenda. "Ma'am, stop moving. Do not lift your foot." Brenda froze. "What?" "You are currently standing on a specimen of Thuidium shenandoah," Reynolds said, pulling out a tape measure. "Do not move. I need to document the crush depth." You're arresting me?" Brenda whispered. The reality was finally piercing her armor of entitlement. For stepping on grass? For knowingly destroying the critical habitat of an endangered species after being warned, Reynolds corrected. That stomp you just did? That's a take. Under the Act, a take includes harassing, harming, pursuing, hunting, shooting, wounding, killing, trapping, capturing, or collecting. You just wounded it. He knelt down and took a picture of her shoe in the moss. "That's likely a $25,000 step, ma'am," he said, standing back up. Brenda's knees buckled. She didn't fall, but she swayed. 25,000? Per specimen, Reynolds added helpfully. And since you ordered the heavy machinery. He looked at the excavator. He looked at the tracks. He looked at the foreman. I'm going to need to impound the excavator for forensic analysis to see how many spores were transferred to the treads. The foreman let out a sound that was half whimper, half scream. Impound that's $100,000 machine. I'm renting it. It's evidence now, Reynolds said. At that moment, a second car arrived. It was Officer Miller, the local cop, the one who hated HOAs. Miller got out of his cruiser. He looked at the scene. He looked at the federal agents. He looked at Brenda, who was hyperventilating near the mulch. He looked at me on the porch. I raised my coffee mug. Miller shook his head and suppressed a smile. He walked over to Reynolds. "Agent, need a hand?" "Suspect is under arrest for violation of the Endangered Species Act," Reynolds said. "I need her transported to the federal holding facility in Alexandria. I have to stay here and secure the scene for the biologists." "Biologists?" Brenda squeaked. "Yes, ma'am," Reynolds said. "We have a team coming from the university to do a census of the survivors. Every damaged stock will be added to your indictment." Miller walked over to Brenda. He pulled out his handcuffs. "Brenda," Miller said gently, "turn around." "You can't do this," Brenda sobbed. "I have a brunch at 11 Unkuk. I have a board meeting tonight." "I think you're going to miss those," Miller said. Click, click. The sound of handcuffs latching onto Brenda's wrists was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. It was better than Mozart. It was better than the Beatles. It was the sound of justice. As Miller led her to the cruiser, she saw me. She stopped. Her eyes were red, her mascara running. "You did this!" she screamed at me. "You planned this! You're a monster!" "I'm an environmentalist, Brenda," I called back. "I'm saving the planet, 1 yard at a time." They put her in the back of the car. Dave, the vice president, who had been hiding behind a bush, tried to sneak back into his house. "Hey!" Agent Reynolds barked. "You in the khakis!" Dave froze. "Me?" "You're on the HOA board, correct?" Reynolds asked, consulting his notepad. "David Jenkins?" I'm just the VP," Dave stammered. "I just take the minutes. I didn't vote for this. Well, I voted, but Brenda made me." "You're listed as a co-conspirator on the abatement order," Reynolds said. "Don't leave town, Mr. Jenkins. We'll be serving you with a subpoena for the HOA's financial records. We need to see who authorized the funding for this illegal operation." Dave looked like he was going to vomit. He nodded weakly and ran into his house. The Green Earth foreman walked up to me on the porch. He looked broken. "Dude," he said, "is that real? Is that actually endangered moss?" "Yes," I said. "It is." "I almost drove a bulldozer over it," he said, his eyes wide. "I would have gone to prison." "You probably still have some paperwork to do," I said. "I hate this neighborhood," the foreman said. He sat down on my steps and put his head in his hands. "I hate it so much." The rest of the day was a blur of activity. The biologists Reynolds mentioned actually showed up around noon. They were 2 grad students in waders who looked thrilled to be there. They spent 4 hours crawling around my yard with tweezers and magnifying glasses, placing little orange flags next to damaged clusters. By 5 p.m., my yard looked like a crime scene. There was yellow tape around the perimeter. There were orange flags everywhere. And in the center, standing tall and proud, was the sign. Critical Habitat. I ordered a pizza. I sat on the porch. I watched the sun go down over the most expensive, most protected, ugliest patch of dirt in Virginia. I was free. The fallout wasn't immediate. It was a slow, crushing avalanche of consequences. Brenda spent 24 hours in federal holding. She was released on bail, but the conditions were strict. She was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from any federally designated critical habitat. Since my front yard was now a designated habitat, and she lived 3 doors down, which was roughly 150 feet, she was legally barred from entering her own home. She had to stay at a Motel 6 off the interstate for 3 weeks while her lawyer petitioned for a variance. But the real carnage was financial. The fines were astronomical. Agent Reynolds hadn't been joking. The take provision of the Endangered Species Act is brutal. They charged her for the harassment of the habitat, the stomping. They charged the HOA for the attempted destruction, the excavator. They charged the landscaping company for negligence. The initial civil penalty levied against the Oaks at Willow Creek Homeowners Association was $150,000, but it didn't stop there. Because Brenda had acted in her official capacity as president, and because the board had voted to approve the abatement, the HOA's insurance policy was triggered. The insurance company, statewide liability, took one look at the police report, specifically the part that said, "criminal violation of federal law," and sent a letter that basically said, LOL, no. Insurance covers accidents. It covers negligence. It does not cover the willful commission of a federal crime by a board officer. They denied the claim. The HOA was on the hook for the full amount, plus the legal fees for Brenda's defense, which the bylaws required them to pay, plus the remediation costs to restore the damaged moss, which involved Gus coming back out with tweezers and billing them $500 an hour. The total bill came to just over $250,000. The HOA had $42,000 in its reserve fund. They were insolvent instantly. An emergency community meeting was called at the rec center. I didn't go. I didn't need to. I heard about it from Dave, who came over to my house the next day, looking like a man who had survived a war. They dissolved the board, Dave said, standing on my driveway, careful not to step on the moss. All of them? I asked. Everyone, Dave said. Brenda is out. I resigned. The treasurer moved to Ohio in the middle of the night. We have to do a special assessment. How much? $2,000 per household, Dave said, rubbing his face. To pay the federal fines. Everyone hates her, Mark. I mean, they hate you too, a little bit. But they really hate her. She cost everyone $2,000. I didn't fine anyone, I said. I just planted a garden. Yeah, well, Dave looked at the moss. It was turning a deep, rich olive color now. It was actually kind of interesting looking, like a velvet painting. At least we don't have to worry about grass height anymore. The management company quit. We don't have an HOA right now. It's anarchy. Sounds peaceful, I said. Brenda eventually moved back in, but she was a ghost. She never came outside. If she saw me, she would duck behind a hedge. She put her house on the market 2 months later. It sat there for a while. It's hard to sell a house when the neighbor's yard looks like a swamp experiment, but eventually a nice young couple bought it. They planted wildflowers. As for me, I became the weird wizard of the neighborhood, the guy with the federal yard. Gus comes by once a month to check on the colony. He brings beer. We sit on the porch and watch the moss grow. One evening in October, about 3 months after the Great Abatement War, we were sitting there. The air was crisp. The moss was dormant again, turning a fuzzy gray-brown for the winter. You know, Gus said, cracking a lager, we could probably petition to delist it in a few years. If the colony stabilizes, you could apply for a permit to remove it. Remove it? I looked at the yard. I looked at the ugly, lumpy, protected mess that had saved my sanity. Yeah, Gus said. Put some nice fescue down. Be normal again. I took a sip of my beer. I looked at the sign. Critical habitat. Do not disturb. Nah, I said. I think I like it. It grows on you. Like a fungus, Gus laughed. Exactly, I said. Like a fungus. I leaned back in my chair. A squirrel ran across the yard, stopped on a patch of moss, and dug for a nut. Somewhere, in a federal database, a computer logged a disturbance. But I didn't care. The squirrel didn't have a clipboard. The squirrel didn't have a fine. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the most expensive silence in Virginia, and it was worth every penny.